The night was supposed to be ours, and I felt it slipping away before the first toast was even raised. I remember standing there with a glass in my hand, smiling too hard, wondering why my own celebration felt like I'd crashed someone else's party. We were celebrating a milestone, our milestone. 10 years together. Not flashy, not extravagant, just a rented private room at a familiar restaurant, warm lights, a long table filled with people who'd watched us grow from newlyweds into something more complicated and real. At least, that's what it was supposed to be. I'd spent weeks planning it quietly, the way I always did, making sure her favorite wine would be chilled, checking that her friends' dietary quirks were noted, even arranging the seating so no old grudges sat too close together. I told myself that love lived in details like that. She arrived late, swept in by laughter that wasn't aimed at me. Her friends came with her, a small storm of perfume and inside jokes, hugging her, barely glancing in my direction. She looked beautiful, honestly, effortless in that way that first made me fall for her. But there was a distance in her eyes already, like she'd left part of herself somewhere else and forgot to come back for it. I brushed it off. I always did. It's her night, I told myself. Don't be sensitive. Dinner started, plates clinking, conversations overlapping. I tried to pull her into small moments, leaning close to comment on the music, reaching for her hand under the table. But each time, she drifted back toward them. Her friends dominated the space with stories I'd heard a dozen times, laughing loudly, interrupting, deciding what we'd all do next. I noticed how often she looked to them before responding to me, like she needed their approval to laugh, to agree, even to sit comfortably beside her own husband. At one point, I stood to make a toast. Nothing dramatic, just a few words about gratitude, about how proud I was of what we'd built together. Halfway through, someone at the far end of the table, one of her closest friends, cut in with a joke. The room laughed. My words dissolved into noise. I waited for her to bring the focus back, to say, "Hold on, let him finish." She didn't. She laughed too, louder than anyone. I felt something settle in my chest then. Not anger. Not yet. More like a quiet understanding I wasn't ready to name. The rest of the evening blurred. Plans were made that didn't include me. After parties, trips, memories I apparently wasn't essential to. When I suggested we leave early, just the two of us, she waved me off. "Don't be like that," she said lightly. Eyes already turned toward her friends. "It's a celebration." That word stuck with me. Celebration. I kept wondering what exactly we were celebrating if I felt so invisible sitting at my own table. I watched her choose them again and again in small ways. Who she listened to, who she defended, who she made space for. No grand betrayal, just a series of quiet decisions, each one telling me where I ranked. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that I was imagining it, that love didn't keep score. But as the night wore on, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't hurt because she was having fun. I was hurt because she didn't notice I wasn't. When the check came and people stood to leave, she kissed my cheek absently, already halfway turned toward her friends. "You okay?" she asked, like an afterthought. I nodded. I always nodded. Inside, though, something had shifted. Not broken, shifted. Like a door closing softly, without drama, without anyone else in the room realizing it had ever been open. I walked out behind her that night feeling oddly calm, carrying the uneasy sense that what we just celebrated might already be over, even if neither of us was ready to say it out loud. The days after that dinner felt heavier than they should have. Nothing had happened in the obvious sense. No shouting, no slammed doors, no dramatic fight to point at and say there. That's when it broke. Instead, it was the quiet that unsettled me. The way she moved through the house like the night had been a blur she'd already forgotten, while it replayed in my head with sharp, looping clarity. I tried to talk to myself the way I always did when something felt off. "You're overthinking it." She was just excited. Her friends don't see her as much anymore. I said those things while making coffee, while folding laundry, while lying beside her in bed listening to her breathe. I said them until they started to sound thin, like excuses repeated too often. She didn't bring it up. Not once. No, "Thanks for organizing everything." No, "Sorry if you felt sidelined." Instead, she talked about how much fun everyone had, how they should do it again soon, how her friends couldn't stop texting about the night. I nodded, smiled, played my part. I didn't want to be the man who dampened joy by asking for space in it. But I noticed things. I noticed how often her phone lit up now, how she angled the screen away without thinking. I noticed how decisions that used to be ours, weekend plans, holidays, even what show we watched, were suddenly group votes, and I was outnumbered before I spoke. I noticed how my opinions were met with patience, not interest, like you give a child explaining something they'll eventually grow out of. One evening, about a week later, I finally said something. Nothing accusatory, just honest. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the house quiet, the kind of quiet that invites truth if you let it. I felt kind of invisible the other night, I said. My voice was calm. I was proud of that. It was supposed to be our celebration. She looked at me like I'd spoken in the wrong language. Then she sighed. Not angrily, worse than that. Tired. You're being sensitive, she said. It wasn't about choosing sides. They're just important to me. That word again. Important. I asked her where I fit into that. Not defensively. Genuinely. I wanted to understand. She shrugged, like the answer was obvious, like the question itself was the problem. Why does it have to be a competition? She asked. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was how quickly she dismissed the feeling behind them. How easily she framed my loneliness as insecurity, my confusion as inconvenience. The conversation ended the way so many had started to. Me apologizing for bringing it up, her accepting the apology without offering one in return. After that, something in me pulled back. Not out of spite. Out of self-preservation. I stopped trying so hard to insert myself into moments where I wasn't wanted. I stopped reminding her of small things. Anniversaries, shared jokes, the rituals that once defined us. I watched instead. I listened. I learned. And what I learned was this. When people show you who they prioritize, believe them. It's rarely loud. It's in who they defend, who they listen to, who they make room for when space is limited. It's in who they choose when no one is forcing a choice. I still loved her. That was the hardest part. Love doesn't disappear just because it's neglected. It lingers, hopeful, waiting for signs that it's still seen. But each day that passed, that hope felt a little more one-sided. By the time the next gathering came up, a smaller thing, casual, last minute, I already knew how it would go. And when she told me, without hesitation, that she'd promised her friends we'd go, without asking how I felt, I realized something quietly devastating. This wasn't a single night gone wrong. It was a pattern, and I had been standing inside it for longer than I wanted to admit, mistaking patience for partnership and silence for peace. I didn't know then what I was going to do with that realization. I only knew that once you see where you stand, you can't unsee it. And something told me the real celebration, the one where choices would finally be clear, was still ahead of us. The second celebration was smaller, almost casual, which somehow made it worse. No speeches, no reservations, just drinks at a friend's place, something she described as low pressure. I told myself this time would be different. Smaller meant more intimate, right? Fewer voices to compete with. More room for us. I was wrong. From the moment we arrived, the familiar rhythm set in. Her coat barely hit the back of the chair before she was absorbed into the circle of her friends, laughter rising and falling like a tide I wasn't meant to swim in. I hovered at the edge, beer warming in my hand, smiling when someone glanced my way, listening more than speaking. I'd become good at that. At one point, a story came up, one that involved me, something from years ago we used to laugh about together. I added a small detail, nothing dramatic, just my memory of it. One of her friends rolled her eyes and corrected me, confidently wrong. I waited. I looked at my wife. Surely she'd say something. She knew the truth. She didn't. She smiled and nodded along with them, letting the incorrect version stand because it was easier, because correcting a friend would disrupt the flow. I felt a strange heat behind my eyes then, not from anger, but from the realization that my voice carried less weight than convenience. Later that night, I found her in the kitchen, pouring another drink. I asked, quietly, carefully, why she hadn't backed me up. She laughed, like it was nothing. Does it really matter? She said. Don't make everything so serious. That question followed me home. Does it really matter? I thought about all the little moments I'd swallowed over the years because they seemed too small to fight over. The jokes at my expense I let slide. The plans changed without consulting me. The way her friends spoke about me like I was an accessory, not a person. Each time, I told myself it didn't matter. That love was bigger than ego. But standing there in that kitchen, watching her choose ease over loyalty again, I finally understood something I'd been avoiding. It mattered to me. And that should have been enough. The distance between us grew after that, subtle but unmistakable. We still shared a bed, still asked about each other's days, but something essential was missing. I stopped reaching for her first. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did, and chose not to ask why. One night, unable to sleep, I sat in the living room with the lights off, replaying the last few years like a slow montage. I saw myself shrinking, making myself smaller so there'd be more room for everyone else. I saw how proud I'd once been to stand beside her, and how lately I felt more like I was standing behind her, waiting to be acknowledged. That's when the truth settled in, not with drama, not with rage, but with a quiet certainty. I wasn't losing her to one person or one group of people. I was losing her to a version of herself that didn't need me the way I needed her. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I'd been afraid of. What happens if I stop competing for space in my own marriage? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew the next celebration, the celebration, would force it out into the open. Because there comes a point where being chosen isn't a luxury anymore. It's the bare minimum. The real celebration came a month later, and this time there was no confusion about what it meant. A friend of hers was renewing vows. Big venue, dressed-up crowd. The kind of night that invited reflection whether you wanted it or not. She was excited in that restless way she got, planning outfits with her friends, coordinating rides, barely asking if I was coming because it was assumed I would. We arrived together, but we might as well have walked in separately. Within minutes, she was gone again, pulled into the familiar orbit. I stood there watching couples dance, watching hands find hands, watching small gestures of reassurance pass effortlessly between people who still chose each other in rooms full of options. At our table, someone asked how long we'd been married. Before I could answer, one of her friends did it for me. Got the number wrong. Laughed it off. Everyone moved on. I felt oddly calm then. Not numb, clear. Like the noise had finally settled enough for me to hear myself think. When the music softened and the renewed vows began, the officiant talked about partnership. About choosing each other daily. About standing together even when it's inconvenient. I glanced at her out of instinct. She wasn't listening. She was whispering to her friends, smiling at something I wasn't part of. That was it. No dramatic spark. Just a quiet click inside me. After the applause, I stepped outside onto the terrace. Cool air, city lights below. I stood there longer than necessary, letting the decision form fully instead of rushing it. When she finally noticed I was gone and came looking, her expression was annoyed before it was concerned. "There you are," she said. "Why did you disappear?" I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I loved. The woman who hadn't chosen me in a long time. "I didn't disappear," I said. "I've been standing right where you left me." She frowned, ready to argue, but I kept going. Calm. Steady. "I needed to know if you'd ever choose me when it wasn't easy." Tonight answered that. She told me I was overreacting, that I was imagining things, that her friends were like family. I didn't disagree. I just nodded. "I know," I said. "That's the problem." We drove home in silence. No shouting, no tears, just the hum of the road and the certainty settling deeper with every mile. A week later, I moved into the guest room. 2 weeks after that, I told her I needed space. Real space. She was shocked, not because she didn't see it coming, but because she never believed I'd stop waiting to be chosen. We didn't end in a dramatic explosion. We ended in clarity. Long conversations. Honest ones. Painful ones. Eventually, we let go. I don't hate her. I never did. I understand now that she didn't choose her friends over me in a single moment. She chose them instead of me, slowly, consistently, until there was no space left for us. And me? I learned something I should have learned sooner. Love isn't about being patient forever. It's about being chosen, especially when it matters. And the day I stopped begging for a place at my own table was the day I finally stood up from it.